It's Tuesday, April 4th. Mitchell Englander, chair of the committee, waiting for a couple of the other members to show up. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and, for those who are here on items 1, 2, 5, and 7, we're going to put those on consent and approve those. Well, it won't be consent. It'll be approved per a communication from the chair. Now, we'll re-vote on those items if and when we have a quorum. So I can't guarantee that there won't be questions on those by my colleagues, but I'll tell you right now that's where I stand as the chair. So those are approved as a communication from the chair. We also will not take comment cards on any of the items that unless we have a quorum. It doesn't satisfy the Brown Act conditions. So and or the rules of committee. Public comment will then be held at council. So for those who have filled out comment cards, appreciate you being here. And unless we get a quorum, we won't be taking those cards at this point, or general public comment. We're going to hear items 3, 4, and 6. We can go ahead with item 6. If there's anybody here from the department can speak on item 6 on ballistic shields. Is there anyone here from that? Okay. Harry, if you could, I just got a couple questions on these. Good morning.
Good morning.
So with these, they're roughly $6,000 a piece, and they're being donated, which is great. I don't know how they're being dispersed. Apparently, we're asking for 7 of them, but I don't know where they're being deployed. And so I wanted to find out where they're being deployed. And if they are being deployed, there's 4 bureaus, and each bureau should have one for their fugitive teams, is what I've learned as well. And if 4 of those are in fact going to the fugitive teams, because they're actually out there every day door knocking, then we need another 4. If 4 of those are going to fugitives, that's great. If they're not, we need another 4. Now, we're grateful. This is being donated by the foundation, and we've got specific donors that have stepped up to fund these at $6,000 each. But I'd like to see if we are not getting those 4 for each one of those specific details, is it possible to go back to them and ask the foundation for those? And if the foundation turns us down, then I think we need to identify the funds either within the department or within the city to do that when this comes to council. So if we can hold off on this for council for a week,
okay,
and then schedule it for a week in council, then if you can get back to us and let me know on those.
I believe there's a process in place whereby commands can request these for their different entities.
Right.
I don't know specifically what that is at this point, but we'll find that out and be.
And I believe that request has been made, so I'm not sure if it's stuck somewhere, but it was made. So if we could find that out, that would be great.
Okay.
Terrific.
We'll be prepared for council when it comes forward.
Excellent. I appreciate it. Okay, so we'll go ahead and approve that with the recommendation that the department ask the foundation for an additional 4 if those 4 are not included for fugitives. And if the foundation says no, we'll figure it out. We should definitely have those 4. Okay. Let's go ahead and hear item 4.
Good morning. Commander Regina Scott with the Los Angeles Police Department.
Ted Ross, General Manager with the Information Technology Agency.
Morning. So we'd ask you to report back and look into a number of things. One, the fact that the phone systems were falling apart and often fail at the police divisions and police stations, particularly in the San Fernando Valley. But rather than just introducing a motion asking for a report back on why they're broken, we know why they're broken. they're old. They don't work. They are antiquated systems and legacy systems. And so what we wanted to hear, and what I specifically want to hear, is some of the best practices, and particularly as it pertains to customer service, phone system updates and changes that would be required to implement those, like callback features and utilizing new measures to ensure that individuals who call the police department, particularly the stations, they can also be informed of things they can do and not be put on hold, that they can now fill out a police report online, the other things they can do utilizing other methods rather than put on hold, and instituting modern phone systems, automatic customer callback functions like we did with the Department of Water and Power when they were having chronic problems, functionality to route calls at the division level for different departments. Oftentimes the front desk is inundated with calls that are not under the purview of the Los Angeles Police Department. People are calling about graffiti or weed abatement and bulky item pickup, all kinds of things that would go to the Bureau of Sanitation or Street Services, the Department of Transportation. I'm sure there's, a bulk of the calls that come in for DOT go directly to the stations about an abandoned car and or one that's parked over a lot of time. So all of those kinds of things should be menu-driven with voice functionality, sort of what I will call cutting-edge 2002 technology. So if you can, and so that's one of the reasons I didn't put in the motion simply asking for what happened and why are they down. We know why they're down. How can we get into modern times from a customer service perspective, and also freeing up the officers' time. Most people don't know we have sworn officers working those front desks 24/7 around the clock at all the divisions, and that's a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money. And certainly, I don't know too many officers that raise their hand and roll call and say, "Can I put me on the front desk?" So it's not something that every officer is exactly excited about either, because they know most of those calls that come in are simply to be rerouted somewhere else, or they have to give information. So walk me through, what are the next steps? What can we do about this?
Okay, and just listening to you, absolutely, you're 100% correct. Our system is outdated. There are models out there that certainly can provide a lot of efficiency, as well as provide the officer with streamline their work at the front desk. And so we looked at several different models, and one of those models is to have something similar to a call center, where all the calls actually go to one location, and then they get routed to where it needs to be. So something like taking the 311 system that we have and expanding it, and so the calls would come in. And then that is the model that you would look at, like the Amazons or the DWP, where they have one call center. They take all the calls, they route it, and then only the calls that need to go to the police station can go to the police station. So that's one model that is out there, and certainly with a solution that ITA can provide, we could do that. But that also requires finding a facility and a location. That would also require additional resources to do that. The second model that we looked at, if you listen to our police department, you know that we don't have a voicemail system and we don't have a routing system in our current system that we have today. So ITA has provided a solution with a voice-over hosted solution where we would be able to have that, where we would have a menu where the customer would be able to do exactly what you said. Be routed to the call, so it may not even have to make it to the desk. It can provide them with information. It can, the system that they have could also give us some analytics so that we can take a look and see, are we staffing our front desk properly? So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ross so that he can explain the system and the solution that we have, and then we can come back and talk about what that looks like as far as cost.
Terrific. Excellent. Thank you.
Absolutely. Council member, you hit the nail on the head. We're running on phone hardware that's around 17 years old. It's from a business that went out of business in 2010. It's unsupported hardware. It's hardware in which at best you could find refurbished equipment, and that is not what we want public safety non-emergency calls to be running on. So we have been starting the conversations with LAPD. There's so many new technological advancements that allow us to take advantage and see improvements that we could make. And I think you summarized them quite well. The ability to be able to take a call, the ability to be able to push things like the online police report, the ability to try to steer people and direct people to websites and digital services so they can quickly get the information they need or get the request done, submitted right there, to help avert having to get to a human voice, and then getting them to the right human voice and getting them the response they need as fast as possible. Contact center systems like that, we run it on 311. We use it for finance and others. We've just moved ourselves to cloud-hosted contact centers across the city over the last year, and we've had a lot of great benefits from that. The same kind of system that DWP uses, the new DWP will say, in the sense that, and I am a DWP customer myself, no one likes to call a call center, but the ability to call and say, listen, there's a very long hold time you've got, why don't you leave your phone number and we'll give you a call back. And that makes something much easier. I can move on with my day and get that call back at the right time. These are fairly straightforward. There's certainly cost associated with it, but once again, these are the types of technologies that we're looking to really greatly improve. So we've got contact center and IVR types of systems that we can leverage, improved uses, as the commander said, in regards to voicemails, et cetera. And really what we're looking at is working with LAPD to identify better processes, the right kinds of technology, and then to make sure that they've got what they need. Because if you move to a contact center kind of approach, it is a change. It's a change for officers. It's a change for how it would be managed, whether officers themselves should be the ones handling it. We also like the idea that when we're replacing an older phone system, we have a traditional desk phone that's sitting out there. The question often gets begged, well, should a desk phone be replaced with a desk phone? We know that just as human beings and as individuals, we're carrying smartphones around. So certainly certain groups of people may benefit better from a smartphone than having a traditional desk phone. They could be reached anywhere. They may be out in the field, and it may be a better form of voice communication. There's also soft phones, the idea that you can plug in a headset and connect it to your computer, which gives you all sorts of capabilities. You could even transfer that soft phone from the computer to your cell phone. So we know there's not necessarily one exact solution that will fit everybody in a station, but as we get a better understanding of the types of operations in a station, then we can start to identify and say, this is the right solution for X, this is the right solution for Y, and ensure that it's all unified and all integrated. Ultimately, what the perspective is to improve the experience of the resident, the people who call, who need information. Sometimes the information is not even housed at LAPD, as you said, so get them to the right place in as least frustrating an experience as possible and get them the information they need or the services they require.
Well, I appreciate that very much. Let me ask you, in terms of next steps, we don't have a written report, and it sounds like there's some deep analysis that has to be done to come to that, because this is a paradigm shift in the way that we've provided service for 100 years. And so whether it's taking those and putting it into a centralized call center or those soft or hard phones, one thing I would ask, no matter what the analysis that ever comes back, stay away from the headsets. The reason I say that is, if you're going to do that, you're plugging those headsets into computers that don't work. The computers in every station are so old and so slow and take, you sit there for half an hour and I'm not kidding, a half an hour just to log on. And on the back end, and that's a whole other conversation, but on the back end, we're getting all this new upgraded technology with evidence.com and all these other things that we've got to do online. Our field interviews, everything is now electronic, and we're doing so many things that are fantastic, but we're doing them on really, really old desktop computers that are falling apart. Yep. And so as we move more to integration and updated technologies to try to make it easier and faster and more efficient for our officers, it actually is having the opposite effect, and that's a whole other conversation. So we've got to be careful there. And maybe while you're out there coming up with this analysis, you could look at that. When do you expect a report to be concluded on this?
Well, right now, we have Van Nuys Station, and if it goes down,
right.
They're not going to be able to put it back up. So we're going to use Van Nuys as the model.
Great.
And we're hoping that we'll be able to do something within the next 60 days.
Great.
As far as installing.
So by the way, you bring up Van Nuys. It's a great example. Go out there in person.
Yes.
And look at the computers, as I talked about as well. I worked out of Van Nuys last Thursday morning, and I had to jump to 4 different computers just to log on. I mean, kidding. It's really, really bad. So old phone systems, old computers, and in fact, we're doing next week an old computer giveaway that we refurbished all these computers and we're giving them to kids and youth and students that are in need. And those computers we're giving away that the city is retiring are better and faster than the ones we've got at LAPD. It's crazy to think about that this is what's going on, but that's the reality. So take a look at all that. So do you want to report back here in this committee in 30 days and 60 days? What makes sense?
Based on the conversation, and we couldn't agree more. We have a meeting already scheduled up for tomorrow. We're on this. We already had planned the idea of visiting Van Nuys Station, using it as a model, so we would walk through and we get eyeballs. I personally, as general manager, am going to go there, and so we care passionately about this topic. Based on the commander's recommendations and with some of the aspects of spring, probably 60 days is appropriate, and we'll have a report to be able to provide it back there.
Fantastic.
Because she's right. We certainly do want to be able to get Van Nuys up and running.
She's always
don't
right.
want to have this issue again.
Yeah. Known her for a long time.
She's
Okay.
both has a badge and is always right.
That's
so
right. Yeah, that too.
That's what I know working in ITA.
So we'll bring it back to committee in 60 days. Let me ask any of my colleagues if they have anything to add or any questions as well, or something that they want analyzed while we're out there in this. Good. And oh, by the way, we do have a quorum, so I wanted to thank, in fact, everyone is here now. So we not only have a quorum, but we have a full contingent of the Public Safety Committee. Councilmember Bonnet.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for your leadership on this issue and for such work on the motion. Just a question to folks at the table about the report back. Everything outlined in this motion is absolutely necessary. I think the chair did a good job underscoring how the technology is embarrassingly antiquated. But to what extent will your report back talk about the personnel side of things? Because it would be great if we had wonderful technology, but if we don't have the folks to answer the phones and the patrol officers to deploy to respond to calls, it's ultimately meaningless. So will the report back talk at least, I mean, you probably won't be able to speak to the patrol assignments, but will you be talking about the PSR needs?
It wasn't part of the report, but if you want to include the PSRs, we can do that. We can take a look. I don't think we were anticipating using PSRs to answer the phones for this particular model. We could do other. We'll report back and we'll come up with some solutions and some recommendations.
Great.
As well as some costs as we move forward, because our budget, for our computers, we had it in our budget for life cycle replacement, and it got taken away. So that's the other reason why we weren't unable to upgrade some of our computers. But we'll put something in there that talk about who should be answering of calls and who would we recommend to do that. If not police officers, what classification within the city would be best suited for that?
Thank you.
We know going into it that we're trying to set aside preconceived notions, and we know that, as the council member said, this is the idea of changing the way we've been doing something for the last 100 years. We can replace an old technology with a new technology that operates almost exactly the same way, and we'll always get the same results. And so we know we want to try to extend a little further.
Excellent. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And so we'll expect that back here in 60 days. We will go into public comment. I think what we're going to do is we'll do that now. We've only got one person, and of course, it's Herman filled out a card on every item. So you have 2 minutes on all the items, and then 1 minute for general public comment. That only general public comment that pertains to this committee and only this committee, and not to any individual on this committee. So those are the rules. Those are the only warnings, because you are here in every committee and you know the rules. And so we'll go ahead and give you 2 minutes on the clock, starting now.
Yeah, motion. Item number 4, Dibble, Dwarf, and Root relative to instructing the LAPD with the Assistance Information Technology Agency to report on handling calls. Well, how the fuck do you handle calls if you don't have people organized to answer calls? Isn't that ridiculous? Let's go to item number 5. Board of Police Commissioner report to the acceptance of donation records. Well, fuck your records because they're inaccurate, the same way you couldn't bring a charge against Wayne Spiller. Then I go to item number 6, bullshit police commissioners relative report to acceptance of a 42,000 donations for ballistic shields. Who the fuck you plan to beat up and kill this time? You threaten Wayne Spindler. You threaten Armando Herman. So now let me go into my general public comment, Mr. Big Ears, Dibble Dwarf. Stupid schmuck morons like you need to learn the Brown Act. You need to apply 54954 in regards to 954.3.c. It's not difficult to criticize a moron with big ears and short sleeves and a receding hairline. Good thing you're not bald like Fat Weezer. Otherwise, you have something to look forward to. A nest egg on the back of your fat, bald head. But then again, as I came through Wilmington Imperial, why the fuck isn't that councilman down there not fucking cleaning up all the trash? I'll tell you why. Because the nigger likes black folks living in poverty. Niggas like niggas living in poverty. And it's unacceptable, Joe Blow. So get out to Wilmington Imperial and clean the Willowbrook fucking station so people like me can commute friendly. And by the way, bitch, the other bitches and all the bitches at City Hall, pay attention. Wayne Spindler versus the city of LA.
All right, thank you very much. That concludes your time.
Thank you, moron.
And those are all the speaker cards. So public comment is now closed. And for those of you who've never been to this committee or any committee, I don't know that there's any newbies here. Welcome to Herman. All right. Enjoy. We'll see you at council, I'm sure.
Sadly, I think you're right.
Yeah. All right. Colleagues, we've taken, I'd like to take 1, 2, 5, and 7 for consent.
Move the items.
All right, those are moved without objection, so those are unanimous. We'll go ahead and move those. And on item 6, we heard that, and so I'd like to vote on that to move it on to council. There was one amendment that we asked the Los Angeles Police Department to either look into the distribution of those 7 ballistic shields and to make sure that at least 4 of them are going to each bureau specifically for the fugitive unit under G&D, and if not, to ask for another 4 out of the foundation, and then if the foundation cannot supply them, and we're grateful for it, that we'd look for the funds. It's roughly $24,000 for those additional 4, and work with the department by the time this comes to council. So, without objection?
Move the item.
All right, we'll go ahead and move that item. And then item 4, phone-based customer service with the amendment from Bonin to look at the PSRs. We'll go ahead and vote on that item as well. Without objection, that'll be the order. So we'll go ahead and move that item. That's going to come back here in 60 days, so it'll actually stay in committee.
So that will be continued.
It'll be continued with that amendment to make sure that that's captured. And then the last one is item 3. So if we can go ahead and take item 3. We ask if there's anybody here from the department, and I see that there is, and come up to walk us through both DOT and LAPD on item 3. All righty. So this was relative to instructing the LAPD and DOT prior to the execution of a contract and/or pilot with a Paylock IPT for the provision of a smart boot devices to prepare and present comprehensive report to the council on its proposal. I don't know that we've gotten the report back yet, and so I know you're here to speak to it, though, and so I want to thank you very much. And if you can just sort of walk us through where we're at.
Absolutely. This process started, Greg Savelli, Department of Transportation. This process started back in 2013, where upon my employment in 2012, we were informed that the Controller's Office wanted us to do more in the realm of trying to recover outstanding debt to the city from the scofflaws. Those are people that don't pay their tickets, 5 and more, allows us the opportunity to boot or tow those vehicles. So we were looking for options. Our current option that we employ is to have the officers find it using LPR technology. Then they call a truck, and that truck would then impound the vehicle, and they would either pay or walk away from their car from the OPGs, depending on how much they owed. The system that we came across that we wanted to look at was this paylock system. It's a system to where it's a self-releasing boot, where the officer installs it, and it's on the passenger side, it's on the street side, sidewalk side, and basically tells the person, you have over 5 outstanding citations, call this 800 number, you can get your car back without having to go through additional response to an OPG or obtain releases from our offices or the adjudication office. We saw this as a efficiency issue, not only for the folks that have their car towed, but also for our officers, to where they can move on to the next tow or impound, depending on what shows up on the LPR within a matter of minutes, and boot another car if necessary, or impound another car, depending on the situation. When we started talking with the group known as Paylock, they indicated that they do business in the state, and that they have a contract with the city of Oakland, at which time we found that we could look at their contract and possibly look at the ability to piggyback, which includes a trial period or a pilot period, to see whether or not this is an item that we want to try to employ here in the city of LA, find out whether or not we can get more of these scofflaws and that unclaimed revenue that the controller's office has asked us to chase down. So that's how this started. This again started back in 2013. We originally sent it over to Transportation Commission. Transportation Commission told us it doesn't need to go through us because it's a piggyback. You can send it direct to the mayor's office. So we sent it direct to the mayor's office. Mayor's office sent it back to the controller's office and the CLA's office. And over a period of the last couple of years, there's been several meetings discussing whether or not we wish to proceed or not. 2 years later, it pops out the other end of the mayor's office indicating please proceed, which was about a month and a half ago. And so that's how we got to here today. The process, the contract has been executed on the city side, not yet with the Paylock side. They're here today if you need to ask them any questions, as well as the OPGs and their representatives. So we have basically, my general manager's intent to be sure that everybody's on board and understands where we're headed, wanted to make sure that we met with you today to let you know where we're at and how we got here. But at this point, that's the story that I'm sticking to.
Okay, it's a good story. I appreciate that. Let me just ask a couple questions out of the gate on this, since this was my motion as well. And oh, by the way, I know while it went through T committee, it truly falls under both. The purview of, in fact, the argument, I think, for public safety, because some have asked me why it's in this committee. OPGs and towing all fall under public safety committee. Mm-hmm. And so this is a counter to what we have been doing, or to augment or supplement or enhance what we're doing. Does Oakland, are they under the exact same structure that we are in terms of OPGs and the way that they franchise out and have the same exact type of relationship in terms of sort of an extension of our own city staff to have these OPGs based geographically and where they're scrutinized regularly? Are they under the exact same
Not exactly
structure?
The same, no. The part of their contract includes equipment and they train some officers on how to install the boots up there.
I don't mean with the booting. I mean in terms of their towing. Do they have official police garages that do they do them in-house? Do they have one contractor citywide? How are they different than LA?
I'm not 100% on that one. I'll
Okay.
get back to you on that.
Okay, so we're going to, that's the first question that we should ask, because we've invested a tremendous amount into our system now, years of trials and tribulations and ironing out wrinkles and ensuring that our OPGs secure property in each of the bureaus, that there's a lot that's been involved and engaged with, more so than, from what I understand, anyone in California, any department or any large agency in the country. And so we have a unique system. And so in looking at that, we've also seen that tows are down, and less officers and or DOT, either LAPD or DOT, are either calling for those tows or the scofflaws. The revenue is certainly down, but the scofflaws are up. So I think there's something we're trying to fix, we're trying to fix a problem with a solution we may already have in place. And I want to get to the bottom of that somehow through this process, which is why I've called this in the committee before we start. Let's piloting something new to create even additional issues we may or may not be aware of with a different provider that may be out there and not going through either an RFP process, but even before that, what are the problems we're currently experiencing, I think, with the OPGs that need to be fixed where we're not getting these scofflaws? And if we are having those and experiencing those problems, how do we fix them? One of the issues I remember that when this had come up a couple years ago, in fact, this first came up with my predecessor. I mean, this has been around for quite some time. And the city family and the council and the mayor thought it would be better to try to focus in on, because we have a unique partnership with OPGs, and how to fix some of those issues. And so if those are, because there was a lot of unintended consequences we heard from other delivery systems, be it, Paylock or others. I mean, I hate to say Paylock because that's the name of a company. I imagine there are many other people in the space, and I don't know that we've done even a market analysis to find out who's in the space. So one of the things I'm going to be asking for is a report back from our CAO or CLA and our DOT to this committee on some of these things. Because I remember going back, and I went through my notes from a couple years ago, and there were some issues that were brought up that they were asked but never really fully flushed out or answered. And those are some of the statutory issues and the safety and crime and liability issues. What happens if you've got, for example, people would pay it either by credit card or over the phone, and then they can go remove the boot themselves, is how this would work. So what happens if you've got somebody with a bad back or disabled or senior, and they go to do it and sustain an injury? The city's liable. So there were a lot of those questions that we never flushed out, even in a pilot. And in fact, a couple years ago, stopped a pilot because we never had flushed all those things out with the city attorney and others. So I like the idea of moving this forward, which is why I wanted to schedule it right away and try to get a report back right away so we can figure out, should we, in fact, go into the space and look at it, or should we fix some of the issues we've already got internally, because we have one of the best systems that has been flushed out that might have some issues that have to be ironed out. Some of the issues that were brought up, I think, last time too, where you've got a scofflaw car on the road that's blocking a lane and perhaps, or is a nuisance, and rather than impound or tow, you boot it, you still have that issue blocking. There were a lot of issues that we don't have a report back on what a pilot would be. So I think I'd like to dive into those. But before I get into some recommendations for any report backs, I know my colleagues all have ideas, suggestions, and input into this. So I want to hear from them. So I'd like to first turn it over to Councilmember Mike Bonin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little confused about how we got here. I just want to ask Chief to follow up on something. You were given the authority to go ahead with this pilot,
Correct.
and the contract has actually been executed
On the city side.
on the city side.
It's signed from the mayor's office and the general manager's office,
So,
and the city attorney.
Mr. Chair, you're asking that they not proceed with the pilot until after doing this report?
Correct.
Okay. I don't share that opinion. I'd like to see the pilot get going. I actually don't think we have the best system in place now. I think there's inherent problems with the current system. The way I view ticketing in the first place is it's meant to prevent bad behavior. And the way I view booting is that it's not meant to be punitive, but as a way to, as the controller has indicated, get us our money, the money that we're owed. And while everybody who gets booted is, yes, a scofflaw, some of them are scofflaws because they just don't get around to paying, and some of them are scofflaws because they can't afford to pay. And they get caught up in this cycle. So the easier we can make it to get out of that cycle, I think the better off we are. So I'm eager to see us do this pilot, other pilots, and try to come up with an easier and simpler system. So if this request for the report goes forward, I want that report to come to T committee as well.
Absolutely.
So we can weigh in on that.
You got it.
I mean, I'm eager to see us move this as quickly as possible. So hopefully that'll be a quick report.
Okay. One question to follow up on that is you said the piggyback contract, and I'm glad Councilmember Bonin weighed in on this, was already been executed. You said the contract. You didn't say the piggyback contract. So we actually have a contract to actually implement?
It's piggybacked on the terms of, excuse me,
So
of
that,
the Oakland, City of Oakland's agreement.
but none of us have seen a contract. Is this the contract for the pilot or a contract to implement, and we'd start off with a pilot?
It'd start off with a pilot, and then if the numbers show that it's successful, then we could implement up to 3 years at that point.
And that's where I really have a problem with the process, not the system, not paylock, not OPGs, but period. Piggyback contracts are a problem if they don't go through the process in committee and the full council, period, on anything. And we've seen it time and time again in too many. And I've got an issue with that. In fact, most piggyback contracts, even if it is a piggyback contract, go through the committee process and certainly go through council. I have rarely, if ever, seen, just because we have an existing contract somewhere and we have favored nation clauses and certainly best prices and practices and procedures, we still are unique. And often, I'll put it, it's rare, incredibly rare, that I've ever seen a piggyback contract go through a process without going through committee and council. It just says, basically, you don't have to go through an RFP, but it doesn't say that you should not go through the proper procedures. We haven't seen the contract at all, so I'd like that to come back as part of the process as well. And again, that isn't on this specifically, and piggyback contracts aren't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, they have been in the past made out by the press to be an evil process, but the truth is, and the reality is, much like the on-body cameras and many other things we've done, those came through this committee and process, and we do get best prices and best favored clauses, best favored nations clauses in there, so they're not necessarily a bad thing.
In the department's defense, though, the contract is under 3 years, so it wouldn't have come to council anyway.
Right, right. So, but we've had those as well, where they still have. And so one of the things we said on the last, in the last conversation on the piggyback contract, this is anything that the department did or didn't do. You guys had followed the rules and procedures. I think in the interest of transparency, when the last major piggyback contract came through the council, fell under the same sort of questions that that we make sure that we hear them and look at them as well. So I just want to make that point. All right, I'd like to turn it over to any of my other colleagues. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And also on the piggyback contract, I understand that when we were looking at a piggyback contract in the city of Los Angeles, we had to identify an existing city that has a similar same contract in the general vicinity of the city of Los Angeles. This is city of Oakland, right? So how do we I don't know if someone can explain to that how...
I'm not aware of that requirement. I did go through the city attorney and the mayor's office.
Okay.
This is where their closest contract was to us, was in the city of Oakland. It's, over 1 million people there. So, it would be probably more relevant there than, say, Lawndale. But that's how we ended up there, is that's where they had a contract at the time. It's, a couple years down the road, they might...
Well,
we had to pick a piggyback off someone, a contract that's in the proximity to the city of LA.
Well, we it could be anywhere in the state of California
On the state, okay.
for the most part. And we actually have very specific rules and definitions. What's rare or unique about a process like this is we would rarely get into a piggyback or any kind of contract without even first doing the pilot. I mentioned earlier the tasers. The only reason we actually got into a piggyback contract was after we actually had conducted the pilot and we compared on the pilot different technologies and vendors. In this case, we're doing a pilot. It's almost a sole source contract. We're doing a pilot with one vendor, and we already have a contract in place, and we haven't even done the pilot. That's a problem. I mean, that to me is a real significant, and it opens the door for, litigation, another vendor coming in. We didn't compare it to anything else. That in and of itself, no matter what we're talking about here, is really a problem, quite frankly. And to have a contract in place prior to even doing a pilot, I can't remember a time in any, and certainly since I've been here, almost 15 years, where we've entered into a contract with any kind of vendor prior to even doing a pilot, even utilizing a piggyback, besides maybe office supplies, whether we already know what we're getting. We're buying paper and pens. So we certainly do it, but not in terms of utilizing a new process or technology. So I'd like to...
I had a question, secondly, on my second question was on the deployment. I'm not familiar with the boot system. So once the... can you explain to me, walk me through the total time it takes from the release of the boot to picking up the boot, or is the individual, the registered owner, responsible for dropping off the boot to a satellite location? Yes, I just don't want this to turn up into a bulky item pickup once.
Right. You know they're going to want to throw it away for sure, but the whole process involves us installing it on the car. Our officers, as they do now, on occasion, will boot a car while waiting for the impound. So we do that now. We used to have a program for that. That takes 3 to 5 minutes for us to boot this car. And then when the owner calls up, verifies that they are the owner, make payment, and one of the advantages to the program is they can make payment for, you could help them with 1/3, you could help them with 1/3, I can help them, but the city gets whole. So whenever that boot comes off, the vehicle is whole. And one of the liability questions that he mentioned is also, if they have a bad back, there's a whole liability waiver that they must agree to. If they have a bad back, don't want to do it, too old, whatever their reasons may be, we'll come back out and release it if necessary. Then if they do release it themselves, they'll have 48 hours at which time to return it to, or we could
the nearest OPG?
Yeah, it could come to our parking enforcement office, could go to our adjudication office, and then if they don't return it, there is an ability to fine them if they don't return it.
Or charge the credit card.
Right.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Nuri Martinez.
Is someone here from this? You seem like you wanted to say something late. You almost ran to the microphone. So I'm eager to know what you have to say, because I know Mr. Englander went off on something that obviously concerned you, because your face said it all.
Yeah, I was just concerned about the talk about the piggyback contracts. That's an exception under the Los Angeles Administrative Code, Section 10.15. That's one of the methods that we can contract. It doesn't require that it be another city nearby. We could do this across the country if we had to. We often do it to acquire buses at a cheaper price. The important thing is whether the process went through an RFP. Oakland did conduct an RFP to obtain the contract with Paylock. And as Councilmember Bonin pointed out correctly, this is a contract that's under 3 years. It's a pilot. If it's perfectly appropriate for a council committee to ask, about all of this and to even receive a report. However, this did go through the mayor's office, as the mayor can sign off on a contract that's less than 3 years. It didn't trigger any dollar amounts because my understanding is this isn't really costing us anything to do this pilot. We're obtaining the equipment from this company free. They will, I believe, be reimbursed for a percentage if we do actually use it to lock in some of these automobiles. But the purpose was, as Councilmember Bonin explained, has an equitable situation to determine whether we could do this much cheaper, because often these scofflaws cannot afford, they're not paying the tickets because they can't afford them. Also, it's a much faster, more efficient method if it works out, if the pilot is successful. You no longer, if you accidentally left your car and you didn't see the sign, that you could have been impounded, you won't go through that impoundment process. You'll get your car as quickly as 15 minutes after, depending on how quickly they contact the department to unlock, and you've paid the fine. So we just want to check to see if this is a more efficient, more cost-effective way to do this program. And frankly, under the department has followed the procedures under the administrative code, and the mayor has followed those procedures. So
in essence, it sounds like we have an issue, or some of the folks have an issue with a no-cost contract or pilot program. It's not costing us anything.
Right, well, there is a fee when the person releases the car. There's a boot fee that the city already has on the books. That fee is then given to the company.
So why has this issue taken this long to implement the pilot? I know you said you were sticking to your story, but what's
No,
the truth?
my story is 100%
No,
true.
what is the truth? Why
Yeah,
has it
well,
taken this long?
it's been there's been a lot of things that have participated during for T Committee, for example. There was an agenda for parking reform. To be honest, the optics weren't necessarily there for it at that time. We wanted to get through the items that the parking group were concerned about, the fee adjustments, the fine adjustments. So we felt that it was better to let it sit until it was ready to see the light of day, so to speak. There was no intention to hold it back from anybody. It was just a matter of the timing. All the committees were busy, and our intent was to, and we did send it initially to Transportation Committee, at which time Mr. Nagel and others said, well, if it's a piggyback under 3 years, you don't need to do that. So then it came back to us at that point.
But the motion, as I understand, does say not to sign the contract until the department reports back. Right? That's what the
That's
intent
correct. We
of
were
the
never
motion.
informed it was.
I understand that, but does the city council have the authority to direct a department not to act on this issue?
no, this is not in your purview because it doesn't meet
Because it's
the
a 3-year
requirements.
contract,
Right.
and it's in the purview in the mayor's office.
Right.
So this is holding, because it's under 3 years, I understand
Yes.
that. So then how are you asking the department not to sign a contract when it's not in the purview of this committee or the council?
Well, there are a number of things. First, we actually do, let me ask the question a different way. Do we have the authority to ask for input on any program, whether it's initiated or not, in terms of report backs, and do we have that ability?
Yes, absolutely. You can
Do we,
ask for that.
and do we have the ability to ask if we have existing processes already in place, how those are doing before we would actually initiate, any contract and or pilot program?
Yes, and that is part of, Deputy Chief Hale just reminded me that this
Actually,
went
no.
through
It's if this falls within the administrative code under the mayor's authority, then it's up to the mayor to determine whether or not he wants to send this forward. You certainly can always weigh in, as you're doing now, but in terms of holding up the contract, no, you don't have that authority.
That's what it sounds like we're doing. Once the 3-year contract is coming up to conclusion, will there be an analysis, and will then you be putting out an RFP?
We will be doing it before that, probably within the 6 to 9 month window. We'll report back with the
About how it's
results of that. That was part of the discussions with the CAO's office. That's what I was about to mention, was the CAO asked us for some of the same information you've asked, and there's not definitive answer. They want to compare apples to apples. They want to look at the number of tows, the number of impounds, the number of, and what is the money? And it's all very important stuff, and that's what we wanted to try the pilot, was to be able to come back and report back with real numbers, real time. How fast does it take to get the boot on and off? How fast does it take to get the car released, et cetera, so you guys can make a more informed decision?
Are you aware of a letter that was sent to I received it, members, I don't know if the rest of you did or not, but it's a letter from the OPGs claiming that they could no longer tow any more RVs or oversized vehicles because of lack of space?
Yes, we're aware of it. There's a delay in getting those tows. They are still providing that service, but they've had a couple of their vendors.
Say they don't want to do this for the
Correct.
city anymore. So then how is that going to be able to meet our towing needs as a city? Well, the reason I'm asking that question is, would this pilot be able to perhaps free up some space at some of these towing garages so that
No.
they could be able to meet the city's towing needs? So I
Detective
understand
Jones,
that,
if you
but
could weigh
Before you
in.
cut me off, I'd like to finish my entire sentence before you can answer the question.
Yes, ma'am.
So would this pilot be able to perhaps free up some space at some of these towing garages so that then the OPGs can actually get to the business of the city's towing needs, which is what I want to get to?
No,
What
there
are our
are
needs?
there are two separate types of vendors. We have our standard duty vendors, which tow cars, and we have vendors that tow large, heavy-duty vehicles. The problem that we're having with the heavy-duty vehicles are these vehicles cannot be disposed of properly. It's not a matter of, as a scofflaw, they have too many scofflaw vehicles or they don't have enough space.
So we're looking at two separate vendors then?
They're two separate vendors and two separate types of tow.
Okay. Thank you.
Is it my turn?
Yes.
Thank you.
You may speak now,
Okay.
Mr. O'Farrell.
So the chair raised the issue of there is a contract, but pilot projects usually don't need a contract, but there's a contract for this pilot project. So that sort of mindset puts us in a catch-22, according to that perspective. So why do we have to have a contract for this pilot project, but not a contract for other pilot projects in general? If someone could explain that.
No, we often have contracts for pilots, during pilot programs. I can name a few of them that I can think of, where if we're using somebody from outside, or we're using their equipment, we're going to enter into a contract to protect ourselves, and they would want a contract as well to protect them in the case we misuse that equipment. No, that isn't a true
Okay,
statement.
I just wanted to flesh that out a little more.
Can I ask, just on your question, because I understood it a different way than what we got the answer for. What I understood is we have a contract after the pilot to be implemented, not a contract to do the pilot. And the answer we were given was, yeah, it's a 3-year contract that I understand has already been executed prior to even doing the pilot. A contract to do the pilot would be different because you're talking about the misuse of their equipment and or liability or whatever. What I understand is we're trying to do a pilot for a contract we already have in place.
No. We have the contract to obtain the equipment to do the pilot. That's very common. I don't know where the idea that we wouldn't enter into contracts.
Because nobody's ever seen any of these contracts on this specific issue, and that's, I think, the line of questioning. So it goes back
Well,
to...
no, in general, I'm not judging the merits of a contract or no contract. But where I am going with this is it seems like we might be sacrificing the good to try to find the perfect here, especially since this has been pending for 4 years, since 2013, 4 years ago. I have a question for you as well. According to a controller's audit from 2011, when Wendy Grohl was our controller, the city was not capturing up to $86 million per year because of scofflaws. Does anyone have any sense of what that figure is, circa 2017?
Hello, Brian Hill, Deputy Chief. Currently, as of late last year, there was approximately $23 million that was outstanding and uncollected through the scofflaw. That number was lower in 2015, and so one of the concerns that we had is to how do we make, in essence, a headway with regard to that outstanding monies that are collected. And so this is why we are seeking to move forward with this pilot and employ greater efficiencies in our operation.
Thank you. So we have made progress since 2011 when it was $86 million. Now it's 23.
I'm not aware of that $86 million figure.
Okay, it was in an audit
That
from
seems-
2011. It's just, and so these are 15 boots that would go across the city as a pilot. About how much,
15?
isn't it?
No.
15?
No.
How many?
There's no limitation on the number of
There's
booths.
no, so it's a citywide.
Well, let me explain. The pilot process or the pilot phase would include 15 being assigned to what we call our high priority scofflaw unit. There's 15 officers that go out currently and capture scofflaws. So we want to use, again, as we mentioned earlier, apples to apples. So we want the same number of people going out during the pilot program as that we're going out now, so we can compare.
So the 15 is city.
Right, it's a citywide program, but it's going to be limited to just those people in the program for now.
And they can handle as many boots as they can handle.
Right.
And so it could be in the hundreds and hundreds.
It won't be that many, but yeah, we could, they'll each be stocked with.
And so how much revenue do you think that could potentially generate in this pilot timeframe?
Well, that's one of the things that we're going to be exploring. The contract essentially, as it's spelled out, is the first year is a pilot to determine what success, what results we've achieved, and whether there's a net benefit to the city as opposed to our current practice.
And so I ask this question because we need to generate revenue fast for the city. We're over $200 million in deficit, and we need to think very creatively about how we're going to do that. And if we have scofflaw motorists out there who are letting tickets collect and that money is obtainable, I don't see why we wouldn't have a sense of urgency about seeing what this pilot project can, how that can mitigate against what we're facing.
Yeah, part of the reason the revenue is not exactly known is because what we collect perhaps from the impound and release, the OPGs may not collect in the form of fees to the city for the storage of the vehicle, et cetera, release fees and things like that.
You'll be looking at that in the pilot, though.
Exactly.
As far as how many are towed
Did it balance
before
out?
and how many are towed after. Right now, how many is it per year? About how many vehicles are towed per year because of non-payment of tickets?
Just this figure is just apparent to me. Last month, for the month of March, we impounded a little over almost 900 scofflaw vehicles.
In March alone?
In March alone.
Okay, all right.
The numbers ranges between 12,000 and 10,000
A year.
A year.
And how many of those vehicles are reclaimed? What percentage?
In 2013, we had 9,444. 2014, 8,562. 2015, 7,145.
Okay, so a high percentage of those vehicles are reclaimed. What happens
Yes.
to the ones that are never reclaimed? How long do they have to sit?
They're sold at auction.
After what amount of time?
It depends on the value of the vehicle. The minimum amount of time would be about 40 days, and the maximum would be around 60 to 120 days.
Is that a generator? Is that a revenue generator for the city when they're
Yes.
sold at auction?
Well, it depends. When the vehicle is impounded, there's certain fees associated with those. Currently, the scofflaw program generates about $1 million a year in just fees from the OPGs, not including the citation revenue.
Okay, all right. Well, it's been pending for 4 years. I find that kind of alarming and amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it sounds like for many, many different reasons and many different commissions and committees, and I think part and parcel because there are a lot of questions that we still haven't had any written reports back on all these questions. And that seems kind of amazing to me, is that it's been 4 years and we haven't had any of these reports. Let me ask you, let me just one last thing on the contract, and I've got some questions for LAPD. From my understanding, by the way, as of yesterday, the contract has absolutely not been officially executed yet, but it's still in process, and that was as of yesterday's double checking. So just put it out there. I just want to let my colleagues know. It was mentioned earlier that it may have been executed. It has not as of yesterday. So we still have the opportunity to weigh in. And then again, there's probably good reason for that too. But in any event, some of the things we don't know is like the differential, and going back to Mr. O'Farrell's line of questioning, which I thought were very good. What is the differential split? What is the financial difference between what the city would get under an impound and a tow versus just the lock, and what's the dollar amount difference. How much is it as bad debt? Because it doesn't. We'll never collect 100%. So we're doing much better, and those were part of ironing out those wrinkles with the OPGs and LAPD and CID. And so we have gone from where the 11 audit was till today, but again, a number of it we'll never collect, particularly on those large vehicles that can never be either impounded or towed or are inoperative, all kinds of issues. But I've got a question, Detective Jones, for a few for you. Are the complaints from DOT about the OPG system, what are those complaints? Have we, what's the current sort of average response time? Have we really spent any time in the last couple of years trying to fix some of those issues at all?
We're always constantly trying to improve the program. Currently, our response time to DOT is approximately 11 minutes. I've worked with Chief Hale and Chief Savali on working with them to improve the OPG response. The OPGs did a small test in Hollywood for about a month where they assigned an OPG truck to go along with the LPR vehicles. The written response I got from the people that were involved seemed to be positive. I didn't have any complaints. Most of the complaints we get from DOT regarding OPGs are not involving the scofflaw program. As far as response time complaints, we received some response time complaints, but none of them involving the scofflaw program.
Okay. And to CID, what questions should we be asking about a booting process? What do you think we should be asking for? Because I want to ask, and I want it to come back as quickly as possible, particularly since we have not executed a contract yet. And I've got a few questions, but if we were to ask the CAO or CLA or DOT, what specifically from CID would, you're the expert in this and you've been doing it a long time.
Well, there's, and let me first say, the police commission doesn't have an opinion on this particular project. One of the things that, and working between DOT, myself, and OPGs have said they are willing to commit equipment to work on this program to increase or better the response time and the efficiency. That was one thing I think they should look, if we did some type of pilot, that a pilot has to be compared to something. And so I think if they're willing to commit more resources to it, that somehow that be evaluated. The other thing is, in a couple of weeks I'll be sitting in some other committees and they'll be asking about revenue. And I think that's something that we need to take a look at, what effect this would have on the city revenue. And the second thing is, increasingly we are changing the landscape for the vendors that are contracted to do this particular thing. And we're changing that, and I think we need to know the impact on that.
In terms of the contracts?
Yes.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay. I want to ask, before I ask any of my follow-up on the questions, any of my colleagues what they would like to ask, come back, if anything.
Well,
This one.
I just want to say I'm not supportive of having a report done prior to the contract. I think the pilot should begin. I think a number of the questions being raised are the kind of things that you find out in the pilot. And you know, I've heard said in this meeting, oh, we haven't seen any reports on this. Well, we shouldn't have seen any reports on this. This contract doesn't cost us. This contract is less than 3 years. I am not in T committee going to start reviewing every contract less than 3 years that doesn't cost us any money. I wouldn't be able to do anything else. We'd have to meet every goddamn day.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I think the ad code outlines how these contracts are done. The mayor's office has the authority to execute it. We can never do a pilot project if we ask all the questions before the pilot. So I'm in favor of starting the pilot and then having all these questions answered at the end of the pilot, or even as the pilot is in progress in both public safety and in T committee. And I don't think that the revenue question should determine the policy question. The The policy should drive the revenue and not vice versa on this. I mean, we need to come up with a fairer and a quicker way of dealing with booting. There are folks who never get their car back because either it's too costly or it's too bureaucratic or it takes too long. Some lose their job because of that system. If we can come up with a quicker system, let's do 7 pilots and find out what the best thing is my approach.
That's okay. And I want to turn it over to you. I just have a question on that follow-up. You stated it doesn't cost us any money. If I understand this incorrectly, let's move forward without any pilots. My understanding it is costing us money, and that's what I want to ask, and that's one of the reasons it's here. Is the company that's doing this pilot taking their portion of revenue under the contract at all? Or are they just completely turning over 100% of everything they do to the city during the pilot?
No, they'd be able to accept the up to $150 in the boot fee.
Okay. And is that any dollars that's per boot?
Per boot, but we're not collecting that now. It's new revenue.
Well, it's new revenue, but would we be collecting it under the scofflaw laws with the OPGs if the OPGs were implementing their portion of it? In other words, is that revenue we would be getting now through the OPGs at all?
No, currently we do not collect the boot revenue.
No, not the boot revenue.
I'm sorry.
Okay, but if there was a car that was outstanding for tickets and that was eligible for either a tow and or a boot, do we have a contract already in place now for revenue sharing under that impound?
Yes.
And this company instead would be taking a portion, and it wouldn't be going to whatever that's, we don't know that differential. They're not doing it, bottom line is they're not doing it for free, correct? Are they, or are they not doing it for free?
Their revenue comes from the new boot fee.
Okay, in lieu of what a system and a process we already have in place.
Exactly, but that money either doesn't get collected at all.
Okay. But my point is they're not doing it for free, is that correct?
There's no departmental outlay of any monies to begin this pilot.
It's not costing us to begin
for the pilot.
But they're not doing it are they doing it for free and not collecting any dollars at all, or are they collecting money?
They're collecting money.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Mr. Chairman, I just also want to know, because this is something that does come up in other committees.
That's why we're sitting here.
Currently, if an OPG impounds a vehicle and it's taken to an OPG, the city's revenue from that would be $129.78. From the information we receive from DOT and CAOs, the differential would be that $25 would come to the city and the remainder would go to the vendor.
Okay, so actually, and that's why I think we need to ask some of these questions and not go into this blind. This vendor, it seems, whether they're charging the same or less, they're keeping more. It's a costlier system to put in place, and we don't have that comparative analysis. And that's what I'm saying that we go. And it's not a matter of we should just do the pilot because, again, if it's under 3 years, they can contract without going through a process. I think we just go in eyes wide open. That's all. It's done in a transparent manner. So I want to turn it back over to Mitchell
One of the
Farrell
things
real quick.
that certainly we're looking at in terms of the efficiencies and the opportunities that we have with the model that we'll be employing, we're going to be collecting 100% of the outstanding citation revenue. That won't change. 100% of the citation revenue will come to the city, and by capturing more scofflaws, the potential is greater revenue to the city.
And so the big question is, will this capture the scofflaws that the towing companies would not? That's what this pilot project will inform us of.
Right.
And so that
the towing companies are not involved in scofflaw capturing other than when we call them and ask them to impound one that we've found. Keep in mind, the other part of
So they're not in that business anyway.
Correct. But the other part of this is it's our hope, back to the efficiencies of the program, that the more our officers are out there, there's still going to be people that won't pay. And we have to go back within 72 hours and impound that vehicle. So there still will be impounds behind this system.
So one could also, because your questions, Mr. Chair, are great, and your concerns. However, if this is an entirely new source of revenue because these scofflaw dollars aren't being collected as is at all, then it's a brand new source of revenue, arguably.
That's correct.
They'll have
Okay.
the ability in real time, if they're out looking for scofflaws or stolen vehicles with the license plate reading.
That otherwise wouldn't be collected, Mr. Chair.
Right.
All right, so
Move
here,
them right away as opposed to having.
so Mitchell, you need to hear this from me, sir. What I'm concerned about is it's gone on for 4 years, right? Since 2013, it's 2017. And when I see in the motion where it says prepare and present a comprehensive report to the City Council, this to me just looks like it's going to be more months and more years before we even get to evaluate how effective this new source of revenue could help us, solve towards solving this problem. Not to mention, as is everywhere you look, the topic is our budget deficit, which is climbing, and that should be giving us all a lot of anxiety. So if we're not going to take advantage of a pilot program and capture up to $23 million, for example, from the last year that the monies are outstanding, then my concern is we're just going to jam this up in more of a bureaucratic process with this comprehensive report to the City Council. That concerns me.
Ms.
Yeah,
Martinez.
so I certainly don't have another hour to come up with different ways to try to stall this. So what I just want to be real clear about what we're doing here. This motion does nothing in terms of preventing us from moving this pilot forward, right? Because as my understanding is that the pilot is moving forward, with or without this motion.
Right, because
Okay.
the mayor is approving.
So if Mr. Bonin, earlier you stated you wanted the reports to go back to your committee, does that slow this process down, yes or no?
It doesn't slow down the contracting side of it. It won't slow down
So
the
what we're
project at all.
doing here, what we're doing here this morning, is this slowing us any further? Because the contract's moving forward, right? I mean, the pilot.
Yes.
Yes, okay, so. For the mayor's direction, the pilot is moving forward.
Right.
That's correct.
Okay, so you're just asking for reports back. You're not.
Correct.
I just want
pilot's on.
to, because
The
your
pilot's
motion states not for them not to sign the contract.
Until the
So we have this conversation. We're having the conversation. They haven't
Precludes you
signed
from
it
having
yet.
the conversation. I want to be very clear about what we can and cannot do. This motion states for us, for the department not to execute the contract. But in reality, we don't have the authority to do that.
That's correct.
Okay. So this pilot is moving forward. When can we start the implementation?
Well, the implementation phase would start as soon as the vendor signs off on theirs.
And when is that going to happen?
It could be next week.
Today.
Okay. So nothing's stopping you from moving forward?
No.
Okay, we're just going in circles then. Okay. I'm being very clear about what we're doing.
So let me ask, if this committee, and by the questions that my colleagues have asked, and what was been presented is that the pilots are moving forward, but don't want any reports back until after the pilot, I'd like to take a sense of that, because I think there's no reason that we can't have the departments communicate and collaborate and bring some of these issues forward while any pilot's going forward. I think in the interest of transparency, that's what
I
I'm
do
hearing.
not disagree with the reports coming back to this committee or to try. I want to be very clear about what we're doing. The motion says for the department not to sign the contract.
The motion has a number of things in it.
Okay, but that is the one thing that I want to make sure we are very clear. So we don't have the purview to tell you to do that. So in terms of the reports back and us having more conversations, sure. I just want to make sure that this is not in any way stopping you from executing the pilot contract.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Savelli mentioned in 6 months we could start having data to use in terms of interpreting its success or.
We have current data for what we're doing now, so we can use that number we'll do it for 6 months and compare apples to apples and see whether or not it's made a difference.
Okay.
If the OPG's losing, if the pay lock is not meeting their goals,
So there's your solution, Mr. Chair. I mean, in 6 months, reports could start being generated that could report to this committee and to the T committee. It sounds like from what you're saying.
Yes, that's our intent.
So going back to this, and again, the motion states a number of things. One was that you report back to this committee prior to contracts being executed, which is the case, which is, again, why we're all here, and they weren't signed as of yesterday. And like to ask for, I'd still like to not wait 6 months for specific reports back that we've asked for in previous motions that were never done. And you asked I think many of you are frustrated that this has taken so long, and I think part of that is the departments have failed to completely respond back to previous requests that have never been done. So I'd like a policy analysis back to this committee and the city experience with booting, because I know we've tried different things before. I'd also like to see a market analysis and other companies or technologies in the space, which is something that's been asked and never answered, and or what was brought up in terms of Detective Jones on statutory issues or compliance with existing vendors and contracts. And terms of those reports and the revenue impacts was also brought up. I'd like to have an analysis from our CAO. So at this point, I'd like to ask that the CAO, the CLA, and DOT with CID report back to this committee with those issues, which has been, again, asked and not responded to in many of those various requests, to come back to this committee. And the question, though, now becomes, is 60 days sufficient time to run those analysis and comprehensive reports and come back?
Are you asking them not to start the pilot?
No. I think that's been asked and answered, Mr. Bonin.
They can't, we can't stop.
I think it's been asked and answered. That wasn't part of the recommendation just now. The recommendation was for them to come back with those reports and not wait till after the pilot. I don't know how much more clear I can be. The motion simply stated that they report to this committee prior to executing the contract. The contract is being implemented in terms of the pilot, but not beyond the pilot. And we're asking for these reports to come back during that phase and not waiting until after, because I know we're going to have a lot of questions just pertaining to the pilot, and I don't want to lose focus on that when that's done. Is any problem? Yeah.
T committee as well.
And T committee as well. Is there anything to add to that? Okay, then that'll be the order without objection. Okay. And we'll get all those to you all in writing to make sure you understand exactly what we're asking for.
Get you everything we can get you as soon as we can.
Yeah, that'd be great. All righty. That concludes the agenda items, and we've already concluded public comment on all of these items, so that concludes Public Safety Committee. We are adjourned.